Hi, everyone. Welcome to the School of Reinvention podcast. I am your host, Roger Osorio. I help parents in corporate reinvent themselves into first-time, purpose-driven entrepreneurs. I also teach entrepreneurship at the University of Pennsylvania, and I'm the author of the book, The Journey to Reinvention, How to Build a Life Aligned with Your Values, Passions, and Purpose. I'm incredibly excited to be joined by Henry Wong, brand strategist, creative director, designer, and writer. Henry is the president and brand strategist of View, a branding and content company he founded that focuses on impact companies. His roots span over 25 years of senior positions in the advertising industry. Since then, Henry Wong has bought and sold boutique agencies and continues to counsel and advise brands and organizations from small upstarts and SMEs to Fortune 500 companies. Henry is also a personal brand guru who has advised politicians, professional athletes, as well as company leaders. He is also the author of the recently published book, Telling Your Story, Building Your Brand, a book on personal branding for business leaders, entrepreneurs, and people looking to advance their careers. Henry, thank you so much for joining us.
Roger, really good to be here, and thank you for such a wonderful intro.
Yeah, my pleasure. My pleasure. We're gonna we're gonna dive right in, and today we're gonna tap deep into your expertise. I want to see how we can apply a lot of these ideas that you have developed and learned through branding, especially in the corporate sector. But how do we focus this on individuals, which is what you're doing now? And we're going to even target it to the ideal listener for this show, someone who is going from corporate to entrepreneurship and doing so in pursuit of a purpose-driven business. So let's kick off with something that I have experienced myself, something that was incredibly uncomfortable for me at the beginning of my journey. And it was this moment where I was in between two identities. I had left my previous corporate job and I was moving towards becoming a math teacher, but I wasn't a math teacher yet. I was on the journey to becoming one. So I was only at the very beginning. And the worst thing the worst experiences of those moments were the times that I had to go to a networking event, which of course are important because I'm looking to build a new network and I want to be out there and talking to people. But at the same time, when of course you get asked, so what do you do? I'm like, well, I don't want to say what I was doing because, well, I'm not doing that anymore. And I don't yet feel confident enough to say, well, I'm a math teacher. Well, because I'm not yet, and I'm working on that. This is something you and I talked about on our prep call and that you cover in your book in terms of how you can leverage story in networking situations and perhaps help us connect with people even when we're in that kind of transition period. Can you tell us more about that and really put yourself in imagine you were guiding me back then? How would you help me out?
It comes down to that very question that you pointed out, Roger, which is, what do you do? And that often puts people right on the spot and creates a huge amount of discomfort. Perhaps understanding the question may help reframe it. So what I mean by that, I came across when I used to work in the big agency world, we had a West Coast office and a Central East Coast office. People on the West Coast took that question very differently than the East side. So here in the business center, we tend to think, what do? You often describe your business or the job that you do. On the West Coast, they interpret it as, what do you do for fun? What do you do for leisure activity? What's your thing? So I think understanding that, my advice to you was reframe it. If you're not comfortable answering it, to literally frame it to the way that would best suit you so that you can engage the person. So, Roger, what do? You would get into many of your hobbies or the things that interest you at best. That in itself, through the element of story, makes you a far more interesting person. Because let's face it, most of us have jobs that aren't really that interesting when you put it down on paper. But describing what you do and describing the things that you're involved in certainly does.
It's interesting because so you're right. Like most jobs, when you write them down on paper, don't come off as super interesting. I had one of the ones that did sound super interesting. So I had to let go of that, which really sucked. I had my corporate job that I had left. I was a national account salesperson. I sold beer coolers that brought the temperature of beer below its freezing point to Anheuser-Busch. and I got to go to the Super Bowl and all these crazy events with them. There were so many stories to tell. And then I hit this moment where I'm like, I don't think I can tell these stories. Trying to become a math teacher, a middle school or high school math teacher, I don't think talking about beer stories is really going to help me get into this world.
But you understood you understood the element of what made a good story. I mean, your background, you were tasked often with engaging people, and a lot of that is where you likely picked up your skills. So if we had the conversation we met today, for example, you're obviously in the realm of math teaching, but at the time, your journey is as important as a story as where you end up. So we often say it's the journey, not the destination. So the destination may be your job function, but if we were to engage you, I would advise you just to tell me a little bit about how you got to this point in the state. So your idea of being, I used to be a sales manager. Today I am on route to becoming the best math teacher at this side of the planet. But you would begin sharing details of how you got to that. And no doubt that would be interesting, and no doubt that would engage me, because in the end, I'm not going to be, as most people, we're not often easily impressed by job titles unless we're president of the United States. But in many cases, it's really what you do, not how you do it, rather than what you do exactly.
Mm-hmm. So tell us a little bit about one of the things that you and I talked about was the power of stories in these circumstances to connect us with the person right across from us that we are trying to ultimately network and really connect with. How can coming in with stories help us really just reach the real goal? The real goal of the networking event is to connect with humans. And, you talk about how in the book, how stories can be a conduit for that.
Absolutely. Stories are really a medium by which you can share elements of yourself. So we know that we better connect with people when we're able to share a little bit from the heart, a little bit of our background, our personal journey. We don't have to get into a lot of details, but that formulates a key construct of storytelling involving people. You think of the most connected stories, the ones we enjoy the most, they're often the ones that you're rooting for the hero. So often the ones who do it well find a way to create that sympathy. On a very evil level, con artists are very good at that. They find a way to get to your heart very quickly, so you're almost handing over your wallet at that time. But used for properly, used for the plight of the good, you can find very powerful elements in the way you share it. And often that comes a little bit from your origin or what motivates you to be here that day. Because quite often, particularly in a network setting, people are trying to size you up and figure out how I can further do business or make a personal connection with you. In the world of marketing, you often think of the consumer, like what is the benefit to that person? So your story in a way should relate to how that person might be able to get something out of that engagement with you. And you begin from there, and then conversation kicks in, of course.
Yeah. What about the role of the, personal stories? You did kind of start to allude to that, right? These heartwarming stories, maybe like very heartfelt, true stories about us. How, somebody who's newer to networking, maybe not as experienced in it, or perhaps has previously just found a lot of discomfort in it, may wonder, how personal can I really get? Is there a point that it's too much?
Mm-hmm. I think everybody has their own comfort level in terms of what they share. But often, if you again apply the principles of marketing, that the element that you're sharing should be the reason to believe the statement you're making. And that was something I had always made use of within the world of Procter & Gamble and other brands like that. If you make a statement, how do I believe that? So often that origin story helps you get there. I was actually coaching someone earlier this morning, and it's funny because we were talking on the very same thing. He headed to a networking event. How much do I share? He started a health center that was motivated by a disability that his son has, and with that was his motivation and impetus to creating this world-class health center. So sharing that provides the human side of it, and it provides the motivation. So it's a story that he's learned to tell time and time again, but it connects with people. And it's not that you're looking for sympathy, because it has to be definitely genuine. What he did
Yeah.
do was provide the reason why, and when people hear it, they just can't believe the journey that he has gone on. And that's really what we're looking for, is to help people create that sense of empathy. Again, go back to the hero story. You have a certain sense of empathy, whether it's Luke Skywalker or whether it is another sort of everyday hero. You have someone that you can, in a way, identify with or sympathize with. And creating that level of sympathy is fundamental to connecting people. And that's done through story, so you can convey that emotion.
Mm-hmm. I feel like, now that you compared it, brought movies into it, I feel like when I think about the Marvel movies, I feel like they went farther in helping us connect with the human behind the superpowers and all of that. Like, I got to know more of their characters than when in the 80s and 90s, when I would watch a Batman movie or Superman movie. It was mostly focused on their superpowers. You can connect to a level. It was pretty cool and entertaining, but I mean, I obsess over those Marvel movies now, because I feel like we see more of that human side to them.
Well, you're exactly right, Roger. I think it's that human side that will connect us, because we can identify with. You go too far in terms of sharing that. Not everybody necessarily can connect with their story, but the same humble beginnings. Whether I'm a teenager who, has that awkward time in high school, but suddenly it has been bestowed these powers, to someone who, many of us identify with being the weakling and wish we did have a serum that would make us Captain America. Things like that can definitely get people on side, because we identify with it. And that's really part of the origin story. So in sharing it, it isn't necessarily to go through a litany of things that you've gone through, but really to connect with people and have them understand where you're coming from, and hopefully they connect with it. But in the end, sometimes, let's face it, you're not going to connect with everybody, but you're going to connect with enough people who are important to you, and that's really the goal of that. So the work we do often connects well with the origins of where you began with.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Let's talk about another topic that you and I covered in our prep call, and this one related to a similarity that I found. So I'll share the story from my book. So in my book, one of the things that I discovered through interviewing people is that reinvention has nothing to do with becoming someone else, and everything to do with becoming who you are. Meaning that with every reinvention, it's almost like you're peeling a layer, to borrow from one of the people I interviewed for the book. And every layer you peel, you're just getting closer to the core of who you really are. And I have found that through my multiple reinventions, that each one gets me a little bit closer to who I really am. You mentioned something similar about stories, that stories are actually, as you reinvent yourself, your story becomes more of who you are. So in a way, they actually are getting better. Even if it seems like in moments you're without a story, like I did and many others who are in that transition period. You shared that stories that evolve with you are actually becoming so much more authentic and so much better. Can you talk a little bit about that and just that evolution of story as we evolve?
Yeah, I think again it comes back to what we as an audience, what we as people like and dislike. We love the story of the hero. We love the underdog, the Rocky story. There is always a form of transformation. You tend to evolve. So, using classic Rocky, he was just a pug who was on the street, who now had an opportunity to fight in a world-class setting against Apollo Creed. And that in itself was what we often term the Rocky story, because it was a Cinderella story from the beginning. But in that way, there's a transformation. And then sometimes that transformation isn't necessarily physical or the job you take on, but really the evolution of your being, of your thinking, how you've grown as a human being. And if there's an element, and this is, obviously a aspect that we're sharing that doesn't, as good storytellers do, they will find a more presentable way of doing it. But that transformation and that sharing of it, absolutely, people can identify with it. It comes from our deep-seated fear of change for a lot of people, and to see someone go through that and embrace it can be inspiring.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel like that's after going through multiple reinventions, when I give it enough reflection and really think about how to tell that story to someone else, I mean, they are along this ride that I'm taking them on this ride to discovering how I discovered myself, because that's essentially what's happening in my case. Like, as I go from one reinvention to another, I'm just getting closer to the core, and that story. And as the story evolves, they're really seeing, I guess it's almost like they have almost a front row seat in that story of how I've become who I am and what I'm doing today.
And I would venture to say that the essence of you hasn't changed along the way. You may have different layers to you, but the essence of your humanity, it would be still intact. So whether you start out good or whether you start out evil, let's say, that part of you never truly changes, does it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right. I mean, many of the core values, the core purpose. Some have evolved, of course, along the way, but there are definitely some core ones that continue to remain. But I feel like as I go through the reinventions, they show up more, or I exercise them more, I should say. Mm-hmm. I exercise them a lot more. In my first job, I didn't feel like I could exercise them as much. So I'm not even sure I knew or was in touch with how much of a part of my story that those elements really were. But then once I got into tutoring math and teaching math, I started exercising them. And then all of a sudden I'm like, oh, wow, this is different than what I do in my day job.
No doubt, very satisfying along the way. I would also venture to say that as much as there is, I guess, a transformation, which for some people suggests something very abrupt, and that really what you had gone through was an evolution, wasn't it? Each day we have an opportunity to learn and grow, and so you may have simply grown in a different way, and that idea of the transformation is still intact. But if you're along for the journey and you see yourself or you see other people, you're seeing the stages of change. So in that way, it can be quite easily embraceable. When people see, if you haven't seen for many years, suddenly see you now, that's a major transformation because they didn't see the steps along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's shift into consultant mode for a moment, or let's tap into your expertise here in a very particular way. So let's say you come across someone who's been in corporate for 7 to 10 years. So you can imagine they've probably had a couple of promotions or a few promotions by now. They obviously have a very corporate mindset. They've got some corporate habits. Okay, and this is a person who is now undergoing a transformation. They've discovered that there is this purpose-driven business they want to bring to life. First-time entrepreneurs are like, wow, how am I going to do this? And they're in that process. They've taken the leap. They are working towards it. They're out there. Let me see here, because I had even set this up in my notes, like this exact case. They've taken the leap to pursue the idea. Now, they're challenged with this step where they've been told, hey, you need to develop a personal brand. You're known for this other thing you used to do. You were, I don't know, let's say an accountant at a Fortune 500 company for a decade. And, this is what everyone knows you for. But now you're pivoting it away from this. What might you advise them? Because they're early on, so they're still in the building stages. So there's nothing really they have to deconstruct or anything like that. They're in that perfect spot where you're like, oh, this is a great time to work on this. How might you guide somebody like that? What are some practical strategies that maybe you can borrow from how you helped corporations do this, big corporate brands do this? And what can we learn and borrow from that process into our own personal branding strategy?
A lot of it in the beginning is really taking stock of you. So while you may be repositioning yourself in the marketplace, again, it goes back to how can I believe this change in you? And often it comes from taking stock of who you are. Within the world of product and service marketing, this is where the research comes in. We find the elements that people are looking for that would make you believe that this can be positioned differently, that you can be something else that you're not. So moving from one job to another is a typical case. Moving to become a founder of of a company or an enterprise is something else altogether. And a lot of that comes from your motivation in doing that, because that's often what drives you. The motivation is your why. It is the purpose for why you're doing it. Being able to share a little bit of that journey and for people to understand that, they may not totally buy into you as the founder of, let's say, a new bicycle company, but the journey along the way will. I've been cycling for 2 decades, and I've built bikes for friends along the way. Now I started this bike company. That's a natural evolution. So to be able to take people quickly through that, they understand, oh, okay, you're doing something that is absolutely passionate to you. And I identify with that much more than I may not be interested in bikes, but I understand the journey because it's universal enough. So understanding your path to that is first and foremost in getting there, and that's really where a lot of the work is that journey to get there, how you got there.
Mm-hmm. That's an interesting start. So really getting tapping into your purpose, your mission, your story. What I like about that story, that quick example you gave about bicycles, right, is that person was able to tell that story without talking about whatever their prior corporate career was. That played no role. The only thing that mattered in that story was that they've been cycling for 2 decades. They've been building bikes for their friends on the side just for kicks, helping them out. And now they've started this business. And I think that was one of the things that I struggled with at the beginning. I felt that I had to mention everything, that I had to rattle off the resume. And I just thought that's what I had to do. And it never felt right as you're doing it, because you're like, this is really long. I'm running. Yeah. I'm going on and on. And okay. And of course, as the reinvention journey goes on, I'm like, oh gosh, this story is getting even longer, or the resume that I'm rattling off is getting longer. And I'm not sure it's making a point. It's not helping. But what you just did made a lot of point.
And that's what it is. The best stories can be told in a nutshell. So within advertising, we often use a billboard as a mechanism to understand what the core idea is behind a brand. Meaning that if I can express everything within 6 words, and the reason you use a billboard is that you're driving by at 60 miles an hour, and you have essentially 3 seconds to take in that message. If I can convey it to you within that amount of time, then I've achieved that ability to communicate to you in a very quick fashion. So if you can begin with that and bring it down to that element of nutshell, then you have the beginnings of a story. With that, if you look at the way advertising is constructed, you have that key message. But there's also sometimes a QR code or a website or a call to action, as we call it, to find out more. So in real life, as you're sharing your story, get that nutshell so that people now begin leaning forward. They want to find out more. They want to find out a little bit more about who you are. So that's really the beginning. So that short little bit is really an invitation to continue talking about it.
I love that. I the simplicity and just like the visualization of that. It's so easy to visualize. Yeah, if I was working on a billboard to tell this story, if we were using the bicyclist, how could we show that through images and just about 6 words? How could we demonstrate, share that story and get inspired by that, and say, so that we can ultimately, I imagine, think that I want to buy bikes from this guy. Like, that's who I want to buy bikes from. For whatever
you really
reason.
touched on something quite wonderful, because in business, as many people have found, it's often not necessarily the product. It may be the impetus to paying attention to it, but quite often it's the human side of it. It's the person you're dealing with that makes you feel comfortable about purchasing that service or purchasing that product. You're in the world of math, and no doubt there's hundreds of other tutors. There must be something special about you, and I do get a sense in just our time together that you're a very empathetic, great listener, and that no doubt has a wonderful element that goes to what you do and helping your students and helping them on their journey, because you're a facilitator in that way. And so much of what you do can be always related to the end benefit to who you're hopefully appealing to.
That's powerful, because I think that when we're thinking about this ideal listener for a show, someone pursuing a purpose-driven venture of some kind, at the beginning especially, their personal brand, their story is probably going to play a pretty significant role in bringing whatever this venture is to life. Might be their origin story, their 20 years of cycling story, whatever that might be. And I think that that's something that someone who's building this business or thinking about this can say, okay, so my story might play a really big role in actually helping people or attract people to this. It's interesting because I often, like now, as I think about some new products that we're thinking about launching, I'm focusing quite a bit and on the attributes of the product, of the service, of the program that I'm building. All right, what are the things about this that are going to make this so sellable, or at least what I hope will make it sellable? And what I'm hearing from you is something that I should also factor in. I am the one delivering this. So how does my story help make this more sellable? Hey, that's my guy. Like, how can I make somebody say, that's my guy? Like, that's the guy I want helping me with this. There's a bunch of other people who could help me reinvent myself. A lot of other coaches out there, a lot of other folks out there who can help me with this transition. But this is my guy because of that story, that personal, there's something about him that's different. And yes, nice features and benefits. That's great. That's everything that, I would expect in this program. But you're the guy who I want taking me on this journey, not a bunch of other people. And I hadn't considered that as a part of the marketing and the communication of this.
Yeah, it is very important because you're really trying to move from a transactional relationship, which is simply here's the products and services, and here are all the traits that this product displays, and here's the price I'm offering it to you. Do you want to do business? So on that basis, I'm just going to assess everything. Am I getting value for it? Am I getting the right item for the right price? But if I inject an element of story in it, meaning that if I can relate to the benefit of how this might improve someone's life, and I've gone through it myself, then you can take it to a whole nother level. The idea of, this is my own recipe for this, these chicken wings that I've created, and I experimented through 50 different recipes to get to this one, suddenly tells people that, wow, there's a lot of work into it. I got to try it. It isn't something that someone simply pulled off the shelf. And that can be applied to so many things. And sometimes you're trying to impart it in a few words, and sometimes it takes a much longer way to tell the story. But ultimately, you're trying to give the reason why someone should pay attention. And that comes back to how can I benefit from this exchange that we have. So that moves it from a transactional relationship to something that's a little bit more deeper and profound.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about a story you shared. So, you talked about the power of knowing our purpose and how we can do better. We can get better at articulating it, sharing it. And along the way, that could actually, the fact that we can communicate that effectively, that could help us execute on that mission, on that purpose. And you shared a story about a young doctor working in villages in India. Can you tell us a little bit about the story and kind of then teach us the lesson that comes out of that story?
Oh, for sure. I mean, it's one that I really hold near and dear because I'm working very closely with this individual. But as you said, Roger, he was a young doctor years ago, volunteering in the villages of India and administering medicine. And he saw a lot of the malnutrition that existed. And there wasn't much he could do about it. But he went on to a very successful career in investment and finance banking, and never forgot about that. And a few years ago, came up with the idea of creating a very healthy instant noodle that was infused with protein, organic nutrients, and it really began to take off. But the motivation for it and why everybody began joining him was really this story behind it. It wasn't simply, here's a product that we're going to put on the shelf, we're going to try to make lots of money. There's a mission, there's a why to why he is creating this, to try to improve the lives of people, to make healthy food affordable. That in itself got many people on side. It's a brand that has done terrifically well at the retail level, but more importantly, it brought the likes of renowned chef Gordon Ramsay on board because he could identify with it, because it was his same story, him growing up. And he shared this with us in a meeting where he told the group that this reminds me of my own upbringing, that I grew up with in a poor environment. My mother used to bring home leftovers from a restaurant, and that's what we would share. So he totally understood. But at the same time, when missions align, when stories align, then you have people that can build this movement. And that's really what it is about. Because the ultimate brands, whether it's a person or you navigating in business, is that you're trying to bring people on side with you to support you to carry off that mission. Because quite often inspiring people is getting them to buy into the mission of why you're doing it, as opposed to simply following your commands.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I mean, I think that's a really powerful story in terms of, well, one, like how that mission not only drove the development of this product and, really helped it in telling that story, but also how telling that story was able to recruit the support of someone like Gordon Ramsay, who can then say, wait a minute, that story is a little bit of my story, and I connect with that. And then all of a sudden they're onboarded, as an advisor, well, I think advisor role you said.
Yeah,
and
that's
so
right.
now they become part of that journey. How can and maybe this particular person, this doctor, maybe did some of these things. What are some of the ways or places where we could use such a story, share such a story, where we might be able to position ourselves to, like, maybe connect with the right people? Or, I'm trying to think, like, if I figure out that story, that purpose-driven story, where can I take that story? How can I make that story more effective and reach more people?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, many founders of companies, unless they have a pool of money available, are often looking for financing. And there's no shortage of these Dragon's Den type of environments where people are pitching their business, trying to get some sort of investment into them. And quite often it really comes from that ability to share what your story is and how it relates to the product, or how it could benefit the consumers you're after, or mankind in some way. So those sort of elements are really fundamental to being able to connect with people in the beginning. Your first ask is often, I have to get a loan from the bank. I have to get a certain amount of investment to get my factory up and running. Things of that sort require you to be able to get people on side. If you're simply thinking in terms of a transaction, then you're going to provide them, those numbers are still important. You still have to set out, what the potential investment will yield in terms of the market and everything related to that. You do all your homework. At the same time, that's just very transactional. If I give you $500,000, what sort of expectation do I get in return? That's very transactional. But if I bring you along and say, you have the opportunity to change the way people eat, or you have the opportunity, or together we can change the way people connect with each other on a dating basis, or things of that sort, suddenly it becomes much greater, much grander than simply what am I going to get for my money. Yeah.
I'm thinking about another moment on the journey. So when it comes to branding, it's not just the story, but how do I get people? How can we get people to start connecting us with these ideas that will ultimately make up our personal brand? So for instance, in my case, right, when I decided that this idea of reinvention was going to be the idea that I really wanted to pursue, I started wondering, how do I get people to think of me when they hear the word reinvention, or when they think about a reinvention? How do I get them to do that? This is a question that I had asked myself at some point. I didn't really know the answer. I went to some friends in marketing and all of that, and I got some ideas. But I'm wondering, what's your take on that? When we know that there's a word or an idea that we want to be connected to, now that we're moving in a new direction, what are some of the things that we can do to start becoming connected to that word in the minds of other people?
Well, I think what you've identified is often the work I do, which is to try to own a word, So that is,
Mm-hmm.
as much as we begin with, let's say, 6 words of trying to convey that message, really what you're trying to do is boil it down to one. So if your idea is reinvention and that is your key word, then that's what you really begin to build the brand around. And everything that you do, whether it's your social, whether it's ads or key messages or the way you describe things, if you begin surrounding those elements to support that keyword, suddenly you become known for it. We know from the world of mass marketing, for example, when I say Volvo, I think safety, that one word. When I say Nike, you think winning, one word. When I think Apple, innovation. So they've spent a lot of money, of course, to reinforce all of that. But the underlying thought through it is that core belief. And if you've identified that as your keyword, then everything that you do to support it will help enhance it. So a lot of it is the work in the beginning to try to boil it down to one word. In the beginning, we tend to do the analysis, the research into the individual or the company, so we can get a good connection of where they are. But we look at how they fit within the grand scheme of things and against, let's say, the competition or in the market, and how they might be able to position yourself. Because you may not have the answer right away. Once you determine that positioning, then you can figure out what your competitive advantage is based on that. From that, your core message comes, and then the rest, as we've talked about, relates to the elements of great story. But owning that one word is first and foremost. By doing that, you now have the basis by which you can find ways to be able to tell that and share it with people in some way, whether by example or whether by, when we take it into the world of brand, let's say, we find a logo for it, because a logo or a tagline is often a shortcut to that inner meaning, you see.
Yeah. I finally found my symbol or my logo or something that the symbol, I guess that I'll say it's a symbol because it already exists. It's a lightning bolt. And a big part of that, the lightning bolt, was when the feedback I would get after speaking engagements and facilitation engagements, teaching, coaching, whatever I might be doing, is the energy that I bring, the energy that I inject into a situation. And so it was when I finally put it all together, I realized, oh my gosh, I think this is my little symbol. This is the thing that resonates most with me. And it was really cool to figure that out, because for the longest time I wanted something like that. I just had no idea what it was. And, so I wanted to share that example because I got it through feedback, right? Listening to enough people, I just realized there's this one thing that's always the same. I always get this piece of feedback, no matter what the circumstance, no matter what it is that I'm doing, whether it's facilitating, speaking, coaching, teaching, any one of these, it's all about energy. And so I thought, all right, let's do that.
Very cool.
This is really good.
Yeah, so I think a lot of that is getting again to the essence of it. I mean, earlier you shared the idea of being someone who's been reinvented, or everything around your brand relates to that. So you have a couple of elements. So when we put these sort of exercises together, quite often we'll on a board or within our sort of motif board, mood board, look at various icons that relate to it. You centered on one, which is really that bolt of lightning, that idea. The notion behind it is certainly the energy, but at the same time, what you are also trying to relate to is what you stand for. And if you stand for reinvention, that bolt of lightning could also be your catalyst for change. The idea of whether, we talked earlier about superheroes, Flash, for example, the idea of, or Thor, the idea of lightning bolt hitting the hammer and having him transform into something is quite profound. So the idea of, while that may be the case, do also find a way to relate it back to what the essence of your brand is, and then you have a winning formula.
Yeah, it's interesting because one of the things I say a lot in the book and in talks is that reinvention often starts with a spark. And now I've shifted it a little bit to a calling, but it's something that hits you, almost like a bolt of lightning.
Absolutely.
Like this passion, this new purpose. And oh my gosh, I have to do something about this. And so, the lightning bolt really does connect to that. But going back to the advice you shared, just finding that word is going to be a really big step, for listeners. What is that word? What's that one word? And that takes time. You got to do some research. You really got to think about it, test a few words out until you find that word that you could say, this is my word. This is the word I want to be connected with. And then, of course, finding all the opportunities you can to share it effectively, so that you
I will share one thing. One of the exercises we do is fairly simple, and it's outlined in what I've written about, and it's simply creating a hierarchy, a pyramid. So at the top, we know that there's only room for one thing, one word. We use a series of post-it notes. So through your interviews, through your resumes, through your LinkedIn profile, through the reasons why you've created this company, you have certain keywords that might describe who you are. Put each of those keywords on the post-it note, and you then take it to this big pyramid that you have written on a whiteboard or on a giant post-it note, and just move those words around. What begins to rise to the top? How do other people see you? Would they put this word at the top? Have them do the exercise. Do I see myself with this particular word? Is it more about being a catalyst, or is it more about the freedom I create, or is it more about the humor that I have? Things of that sort. You move it around, and eventually what you find is that there is one keyword that rises to the top time and time again, and that's the word that you can end up owning, because everything else is just really in support of it. And that's really the beauty of the exercise, is to get to that single word so you understand the essence of you, the essence of who you are and what your brand is.
Awesome. Henry, thank you so much for lending your expertise to this and allowing us to tap into you, as an expert, as a consultant on this topic. Like I said, the moment that, I discovered you and realized, okay, we need this on the show, it was because I thought back to that story, that first time, those initial networking events during my reinvention, and how this was just the scariest moment. How do I even talk about myself when I'm in transition? And I think this is important for a lot of people who are either thinking about getting onto a journey, or they're currently on it and they're in that middle, that transition, and they're not sure how to do that. And I feel like a lot of the things you shared with us will help, will give us hope. All right, there's a way to figure this out. This is figure outable. And I just, for the audience, the book is telling your story, building your brand. You can find it, I think, in most places, right, where books are sold. So that shouldn't be too much of a problem. But we will have the link in the show notes. So do check that. Henry, anything, anywhere you'd like to point the audience, or anything you'd like to share with them before we wrap up?
Yeah, no, I think through this, we talk about reinvention, we talk about positioning yourself in the marketplace. The one thing I've always held true, and I really want people to understand, is that inventing yourself or reinventing yourself or finding yourself isn't necessarily a way to move away from who you are. So the ultimate advice really is to thine own self be true. A Shakespeare line, but it's so true. We want to ensure that, and this is what we mean by authenticity. Be yourself, be the true you who you want to put out in the world.
Yeah, I love it. Great words to end with. Thank you again. Appreciate your time.
It was fun being here. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the School of Reinvention podcast. Again, I'm your host, Roger Osorio. If you're ready to start your journey to reinvention and want to walk the path with others, visit www.rogerosorio.com and go to the School of Reinvention to check out for yourself how a community-based coaching platform can help you begin your next reinvention. You can also go to rogerosorio.com to purchase my new book, The Journey to Reinvention, and receive some exciting bonuses. Until next time, make your day great.